Hello, welcome everyone to our town hall today, Tuesday, April 13th. My name is Shelby. I'm the Professional and Organizational Development Director with Montana Nonprofit Association. If you've been to a town hall in the last couple of weeks, you know that MNA does what we do because we believe that nonprofits are essential. Maybe not in the mandated state sense, but certainly essential to our communities, our local community, our local governments, our families, our health and safety, our livability, and that the work that you guys do across the state is absolutely imperative to see us through the next couple of weeks and the upcoming years. And so, in order to meet the responses and the needs of questions that you guys have and the tricky scenarios you're all navigating your way through, we've developed these town halls to meet your needs that are immediate, and then also as you're looking forward to what comes next. If you have questions, we're going to just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have questions, go ahead and either raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or we will take them through the chat and we'll kind of compile them. And if you have any problem seeing the screen or freezing up, please let me know. You can also send me an email and connect that way, just in case you have any problems. But thanks for being here today. It's my pleasure to hand it over to Adam Jesperson, who is our Director of Innovation at MNA. He has an MBA from University of Montana Business School and has been working with us for the last year or so to really better understand innovation and nonprofit operations in a way that is pretty unique and instrumental in shaping our curriculum generally and also our response right now. And over the past couple of weeks, he's been taking probably too close a look at the federal relief options, but has put together some really great resources that I think can really help, not just with understanding the options that are available to you, but really being able to navigate and make some smart decisions as to what's going to be the best thing for your organization and your position right now. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Adam. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Shelby, and thank you for everyone for being here. If you've been with us for the past few weeks, you know that we've covered federal relief packages and unemployment and this, that, and the other related to relief and resources for small businesses and nonprofits. We've covered that quite a bit. And so this afternoon, I think we're going to take a bit of a step back and try to synthesize a little bit about all the different things that we've heard and maybe try to make sense of how to move forward, what questions you have, and how we can just put in place some priorities for you to ask yourself as you try to make decisions around what should be the next steps that I take. Before we do that, though, it's going to be helpful for me and for Shelby and I guess, to get a sense of where you are right now. Are you seeming to be tracking what's happening with different loan programs or with unemployment or with things that are coming from the state or the federal government? Or is everything just still seem sort of like written in Greek? So before we get started, if we could just take a moment, we're going to maybe open up the mics, or if this is a chance for you to raise your hand if you'd like to comment, or just comment in the chat. But I really would just like to get a sense from each of you of what's on your mind. What are you hoping to get out of this conversation? What are you hoping to get out of, what do you need? What are the questions that you need to answer in the immediate for you and your organization as we move forward? So again, if you want to unmute yourself and speak, that would be awesome. If you'd like to just put a comment in the chat box, that would be helpful. That's going to help guide where we go for the next half hour, 45 minutes in regards to the information that we share. So I'll step back and be quiet and just give you guys a chance to raise your hand or put a comment in the chat section. Go ahead, Leah. I think you're unmuted.
Hi, this is Leah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep, we can hear you. Yes.
Oh, I keep coming in and out of hearing you and not hearing you. Hold on.
I'll send the dial-in number.
I'm sorry, can you hear me still?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I keep on toggling between headset, and that seems to be making it not want to comply with me. Okay, so hi, my name is Leah, and I am an executive director for a nonprofit here in Livingston. And I guess I would say I am tracking, although it does feel like a lot to track. And I think it's pretty clear that guidance is sort of changing frequently and
Mm-hmm.
quickly. So I'm aware of that. I'm not feeling like, oh, I'm not keeping track, but it is a lot. And I guess I felt the reason why I wanted to join today was just kind of, it helps sort of reinforce a little bit of, maybe how I'm tracking things, or if I should be making decisions about things. I know that we're all in different places, but I feel like working with peers, like when I say peers, other nonprofits, makes me feel comfortable that, oh, okay, I hadn't thought of looking at that. I need to look at that now. So that's more or less why I wanted to participate in this call today, just to make sure I was, keeping my eyes open to um, what I could and should be doing. So
Yes. Great. Great. Thank you, Leah.
yeah.
There's a couple people commented in the chat. So one said we're behind in implementing the PPP. Should we be worried about that? Another question was, or comment was, following the SBA loans and unemployment to assist our clients. What are the risks for applying for an EIDL PPP? Should we be applying? Trying to gain understanding of all of our options. Employees are furloughed or have reduced hours. Our PPP and EIDL emergency grants have been submitted, and we need to decide to sign the PPP funds tomorrow, but unsure of how this fits with the timeline of our school closure. Okay. That's a helpful orientation for Shelby and I think. And I think the resources that we can offer today will be helpful in that. And as we're going along, I guess, if you have questions, feel free to chat them in right in real time, and we will get to them as best as we're able so we can have this conversation. I think, so we're going to touch on some of the resources that we have created just over the past week here at MNA to help make sense out of some of the decision making, and also point you in the direction of all of the a synthesis of the frequently asked questions that we keep getting and our answers to those. In addition, we're also going to do a quick, everyone has the question of, well, is the PPP a forgivable loan? Meaning, is it money that I don't have to pay back? And if so, how do I know that I'm going to be okay once I get to the end of this, so that I know that I'm not going to have to pay money back or convert it to a loan that gets paid back over 24 months? So I have a little more guidance on what those calculations are. So as you are submitting your PPP application, you know what next steps you need to take to be sure that when you get to the end of it, that you're not in a position where you have a payback. So that's, I think, where we're headed. I'm going to so my screen is shared here, and I'm going to try to get to some of our resources so that you can see. There's my wife and kids. So for those of you that have been tracking the resources that we've been putting online, if you go to mtnonprofit.org, there's a call out on the left side of the screen that says COVID resources and something along those lines. At that takes you to this page right here, COVID-19 nonprofit response, which has a lot of links and a lot of resources that we have curated and put here, and that we think is sort of the best and latest and greatest that we could find. We've called out some of those here that we think are more important, at least right now, over here on the left, that say MNA resources. We have the links to our town halls, of which you're a part of right now. You have the ability to schedule a one-on-one appointment with myself or with Shelby or with anyone on MNA staff to just do a 1 hour one-on-one touch base individual consultation. We have our frequently asked questions, which we're going to get to. We have our navigator flow chart, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And then we have our member support. So we've partnered with West Staff, which is a personnel, sort of a human resource management agency here in Helena. And they have a forum of questions or of resources. And you can also put in questions there and they will answer those. And it's a pretty interactive forum for you to access if you are an MNA member. So there's a process for you to sign up and gain access to that forum That forum is best if you are interested in learning how do you work with laying off employees and allowing them to access unemployment or rehiring or anything related to personnel management. That's probably the best place to turn for that. But if you were to click this Federal Relief Navigator, it's going to take you to this page right here, where we've designed, basically it's just a flow chart where it asks you questions and you answer the question according to your needs, and it sort of walks you through what options you have and what resources you have and where you should turn next. So this is all related to what are the relief options that I have to help me with the business impacts that I've had related to COVID-19. The big two that we've heard talk about, and that you mentioned it in the chat, are these two loan processes, both run through the Small Business Administration, the SBA. One's called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL, and the other is called the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP. Those are the two big programs that everyone's been hearing about, talking about, applying for, analyzing, and trying to decide whether or not that's a good route for me. Big differences are the Paycheck Protection Program is a mechanism designed to allow employers to pay their employees, to keep them on the payroll for the next 8 weeks in the short term. The EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, is meant to provide working capital for non-payroll related expenses. For most nonprofits, that is less important. Really, for most nonprofits, most of our money goes towards personnel and rent and utilities, which is what the Paycheck Protection Program is designed to cover. The EIDL is meant for if you have products and services and you have to buy inventory, or if you have to make some other large working capital investments in addition to payroll and lights and utilities. Those are the differences between some of the differences between the two, just in function. The Paycheck Protection Program is a forgivable loan, meaning a portion or all of it is allowed to be forgiven after the end of the 8-week period, meaning you don't have to pay it back. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan is meant to be something it's an obligation. It's something that you do have to pay back, although it's paid back at a very low interest rate. Right now it's at 2.7% interest, spread out over as much as 30 years. The Economic Injury Disaster Loans, you can apply for up to $2 million. The Paycheck Protection Loan is 2.5 months of your payroll up to $10 million. And that's what can be forgiven under certain circumstances. So this is the navigator right here. You have these first two questions. Are my needs related to personnel? If so, we're suggesting that the Paycheck Protection Program is the latest and greatest and probably your best option to go down, your best route to go down. If you're just looking for non-payroll related expenses, the EIDL is probably a better option. The EIDL is also a better option if your employees are not actually on your payroll, but they are independent contractors. That gives you a mechanism to pay them because you cannot apply for a PPP loan and pay independent contractors from that money and have that be forgiven. There's the guidance on both of these programs seems to be changing daily. Since we posted this last Friday, some of the guidance that we received in regards to the advance, the $10,000 advance that you can get EIDL, it's obsolete already. So originally that we were told, and we gave guidance on, that you can apply for the EIDL, but as part of that, you can apply for a $10,000 cash advance that's paid out before the rest of the process gets completed. And that advance does not have to be paid back. That becomes a grant that you don't have to pay back under any circumstances. The original guidance was that $10,000 was truly just $10,000 regardless of circumstances. We have since gotten guidance that it's actually $1,000 per employee up to a cap of 10 employees. So if you have more than 10, you get $10,000. But if you only have 2, that advance is only $2,000. Also know that if you decide to walk down the route of getting an EIDL loan and you get that advance, and then you decide not to go through with the rest of the EIDL loan process, but you decide to do the PPP, whatever amount you received as an advance gets rolled into the PPP, and the maximum amount that you can apply for in the PPP program gets reduced by that amount. So you can't double dip per se, and you can't get extra money from that cash advance from the EIDL and then take out a full PPP loan. The Paycheck Protection Program is designed to cover 8 weeks of payroll plus mortgage interest or rent and utilities for your organization to just keep the lights on and keep the doors open and keep you moving forward for the next 8 weeks. Frankly, at this point in time, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of 8 weeks as far as, is there going to be a continuation of that if we're still in this full quarantine mode? I don't think anyone has that guidance. This was just the federal government's response for the next 2-month period, 8-week period, to get us through as a bridge to whatever happens on the other side. And I think we're going to cross that bridge and then see where we are at that point to see if there will be any kind of an extension or if there will be any kind of a new program that rolls out at that point in time. I'm going to walk through a little bit later the calculations for how to know whether or not you're in a position where that PPP loan will be forgivable. But just know that the PPP is related to personnel. And but you also have to be able to make payroll while that aid is coming through, right? So if you were to apply for that tomorrow, or if you've applied for it already, there's a period of time where you have to get by before you're able to get that money in the door and to be able to pay your employees. We have a cash flow planning template, which if you click this will open that template that allows you to map out on a week-by-week basis how much money you have as far as cash in the bank, what are your cash obligations, and are you in a position where you're able to meet those obligations and keep your employees on without receiving that aid. If you're in a position to do that, great. That means you can sort of weather the storm while that money comes in, and which will then help get you through the next 8 weeks. If you're not, we have some guidance here on your ability to reach out to your bank to open an operating line of credit with them, with a local lender that could help sustain you. It's worth a try at this point. I can't imagine there's a lot of banks that are doing that sort of lending in addition to the federal relief programs, but it's worth a try. And the guidance we received Friday from Tom McGree, who's with First Interstate Bank here in Helena, said that those traditional lending programs are still open and viable, and our local banks are trying to do whatever they can to generate business, and also to help their communities. So even if you're not in a position to get that PPP loan now, or it sort of bridge your way from cash available now to receiving that money, reaching out to your lender just for any other options is a good, viable option for you as well. There's also links in here if you want to learn about the Paycheck Protection Program. Just click this and it'll take you to the SBA site to learn about all the requirements of applying. Same for the EIDL, and right here you can click this link and it's going to take you to the application for the EIDL program. We have further guidance down here. So those are the two big ones, right? Those are the two big federal programs, the PPP and the EIDL. There are other mechanisms that the feds have released with the CARES Act and with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was the second piece of legislation that passed a few weeks ago, that are additional options for you as an employer. So if you're unable to secure a PPP loan or an EIDL loan, either because funds run out or because you're disqualified from doing so, which could mean that you have too many employees. These are only options for organizations with less than 500 or fewer employees, or you have some sort of restrictions on your line of business. I can't imagine anyone in here this would apply to, but if your main source of revenue is from gambling or some sort of other illicit or frowned upon activities, you may not be able to apply for a PPP loan. There are other mechanisms that may apply, one of which is the Employee Retention Credit, which provides you a refundable payroll tax credit for 50% of your employees' wages, up to $10,000 of those wages. So basically a $5,000 credit per employee that you can basically just use it as a credit on payroll taxes that you are paying to to the federal government every pay period. So you can basically reduce your payroll taxes by whatever amount this credit allows you to do, and not pay that into the system. And you can learn more about that by clicking this link. Another option, which you could do, you could do either or. You could do either the employee retention credit or the deferral of payroll taxes, which basically just allows you to defer payment of your share of your Social Security taxes on your employees' wages, starting from, I think, March 31st. I have the actual date. Yeah, March 27th through the end of the calendar year, you're allowed to defer payroll taxes for your those employees. These are not options if you're able to secure a PPP loan or an EIDL loan. But if you're not able to get those, these may be options for you to get some sort of relief for you and your organization. As you work through this, though, we do also give some options for what you should consider if you're to the point where you need to reduce your payroll. You're not in a position where the PPP is going to get you through. You don't have the reserves or whatever it may be. You don't have work. You don't have whatever the circumstance. There are options for you, and there are options for you to point your employees to. They're going to connect them with pretty good unemployment support, because that system has been beefed up in a pretty large way in the last few weeks. So if you're in a position where if you have some work for your employees to do and some funding to pay them, you can offer a reduced schedule, and they can qualify for partial unemployment benefits. I am not an expert on HR law and on unemployment, but if their wages are reduced by more than 25%, they should at least go to the state unemployment website, which we can put a link to. We don't have it here, and learn what their options might be. They can apply for unemployment, and they may get some benefit from that, even if they're still working on the payroll on a partial level. In addition, the federal government kicked in with the Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Act that weekly unemployment benefits of any amount will have an additional $600 per week added to those from now through July 31st, 2020. So there's some pretty good benefit for folks who are put on unemployment and are not receiving wages from their employer. So you can offer partial work, and they can still, under certain circumstances, receive some unemployment aid, including most likely this Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Act bump of $600 per week. Additionally, if they have work, that's great. You can keep them on in some form or fashion. If they do not have any work, or you do not have any funding to pay them, that's when you need to consider a temporary layoff or furloughing your employees, in which case they can reach out and file for unemployment under most all circumstances. And also, in addition to the unemployment they would receive from the state, would receive this additional $600 per week from the federal government. And I think I just heard this morning from our HR consultant that just last week, $11 million was paid in unemployment benefits in the state of Montana to individuals. So there's people accessing this system and receiving benefits on a pretty timely fashion. There's also this yes, but here, which is if you have employees who you have work for them to do, you have funding to pay them, but they have requested or have been required to take leave due to COVID-19. And this could be either if they've contracted the virus themselves, they are dealing with individuals, caring for individuals who've been infected with the virus, or they have been put on basically a quarantine order, which would be from the state of Montana says we're shutting down everything but essential business. That means that they've been impacted by COVID-19, and that Families First, FFCRA, whatever that is, that Families First Coronavirus Response, there it is, provided some mechanisms for you as an employer to pay them up to 10 days of sick leave, emergency leave, and you to get some tax credit on the back end, reimbursed for the costs that you outlaid for that emergency leave. So there's a flow chart right here to walk you through that. So if the employee has been diagnosed with COVID-19, has symptoms and is awaiting a diagnosis, or has been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine themselves, they provide you with documentation. You provide them with 10 days paid sick leave at 100% of their regular rate for the number of scheduled hours that they were unable to work. And then you receive full reimbursement through a payroll tax credit. And we have some further support. I think we'll probably get it on our FAQ page that walks you through the process of applying for those credits and what documentation is required from the employee to you, and from you as the employer to the IRS to access that. It was in our HR webinar this morning. If the employee is not themselves diagnosed with COVID-19, but they must take care of an individual who is diagnosed with COVID-19, or that person has symptoms and is awaiting a diagnosis, or that person has been advised to stay at home and isolate, they provide you with that documentation. If they're the person caring for the person who is sick, you are required to pay 2/3 of their regular rate for up to 10 days. And then you receive reimbursement through the same mechanism. And the same mechanism is in place if you must take care of a child due to a closure or a place of care, to a school closure or a place of care closure. You are required to pay their 2/3 of their pay for up to 10 days, and then receive credit on the back end through payroll tax credits. So this is just a bit of a flow chart that walks you through some decision points and some things for you to ask. I want to walk through for a second. I want to come back to this Paycheck Protection Program, and I want to pivot back to my PowerPoint to walk through how to calculate what amount of that is going to be reimbursable. Before I get to that though, the mechanism for applying for this. So if you have not applied for a Paycheck Protection Program loan, that is done through local lenders. It's not done directly through the SBA. Most lenders in the state of Montana, most banks in the state of Montana are approved lenders of the SBA. And you should reach out to your bank to see if you can apply for this program. They will have their own process for how to get this done. It's going to look the same across most banks, but they're going to have either an electronic process or just emailing them information or mailing it or whatever it might be. They're going to have their own process. So reach out to your lender as soon as possible if this is something you're interested in. You've probably heard, if you've been tracking at all, that there was a certain amount of money allotted for this program, and everything we've heard in the news says, well, that money's running out. People have lined up and gotten in the queue, and there's much more demand than there is funds to meet. My guidance for you on that is, yes, it was a first come, first serve kind of program, and that is where we are. But we did hear in the past few weeks, both from our congressional representatives and from the SBA, that there's probably more help coming to supplement this program. I think a lot of the new legislation that Congress is looking at is related to beefing up this program in particular. And we heard from, I think it was Esther's staff and maybe from Gianforte in the last couple of weeks, that they are most concerned, as far as new help and new relief, they're most concerned with making sure that the existing relief mechanisms are fully funded and are working as well as they can be before they talk about adding new mechanisms and new programs and other items. So I fully believe that these programs are going to be refunded if they haven't been, if they are running out at this point in time. I kind of look at it like a bit of the toilet paper thing that we had a few weeks ago, where there was a run on getting your supplies. But if you were to go to Costco today, there's thousands of packages of toilet paper. So I think get in, try to get your loan figured out as soon as possible, but don't concern yourself if you're hearing on the news that the money's going to run out and there's not going to be any left for you. I think it's going to work itself out. I think it's a bit of a blip in the demand right now, but I think we'll be okay. And I haven't checked the chat. I want to see if we have any questions. Shelby, is there any questions that we need to handle before I hop back to the PowerPoint?
Not too many questions. You know, that initial concern, and so this might be let's put a pin in it and think about it, but we've had the question come up a lot of, you know, I'm applying or considering applying for the PPP, but I don't know if I have enough work for my employees to keep them employed during that time. And I've heard a couple of, you know, some advice from Jim at West Staff about what an employer's options are. And we've also heard some stories from other nonprofits, but do you have guidance or thought on, you know, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to have work for my employees. Should I still consider applying for that PPP?
Yeah, a little bit. I don't have great guidance. I think it's important to remember what the intent of that program was. The intent of that program is to keep people on payroll. It's not to, frankly, it's not to make sure that they have a lot of meaningful and frankly meaningful work for them to do. The intent of the program is to keep people on payroll. So I think for you as an employee, it's your chance to get creative and to talk with your employees about things that they can do to keep themselves busy and add value and add revenue or whatever it might be. Or to go get some of their own professional development training done, or brush up on something. Like, this is your chance to kind of get creative. Knowing the intent of the program is to keep people on staff as much as is possible. And if you take out a loan, if you take out that loan, it's imperative for you to keep them on staff at the level in which they were before, as we'll see when I get into the calculations, for that loan to be forgivable. So I think it's your chance to be creative and really think about how you can add value for your company or your organization at this time where some programming and some services are more limited.
Yeah, and I think you know, Jim said it. An employer can decide to pay employees and keep them, you know, employed at any time without with a little bit of different job descriptions. Obviously, that has to be agreed upon and set clearly. It's probably easier with salaried employees than it is with hourly. But I do think that idea of the intent is to keep people on payrolls. And so if you're able to be creative, dig up some of those old projects, fund development projects, whatever that might be, even if it's not their normal, you know, chart of business, if it's in line with things they might be able to work on. Something else we've seen in Thailand was on the call and wrap it up. We've seen some nonprofits that, you know, are without work for their employees connect with partners or nonprofits in the community that need help and, you know, aren't able to meet their program needs or have increased demand for their programs. So if you are a nonprofit that has some close partners in your community that are also nonprofits, I think that's one of those great ways to be creative as well, about how you might be able to utilize your personnel and your resources to help with a broader community effort. Of course, that all comes with the caveat that, you know, if it's too outside of the scope of your mission, it's something to weigh that opportunity against. But I think there's plenty of collaborative projects and programs that we could all, you know, take 10 minutes with your team and think of who are the people that we work with, what do they need right now, and how can we work with them to bring something together.
Yep, that's a great comment. I'm going back through the chat, and one of the comments on here was someone saying they haven't submitted their PPP loan yet, and should we be worried? And I do want to reiterate that everything we've heard says, or everything that you're hearing in the media says that, well, the demand has way outpaced the funds available, and there's not going to be funding. And, you know, it's, if you haven't already applied, it's too late. Don't worry about that. This is a program that's supposed to be in place until June 30th. It's only, you know, early April at this point. So I think you're going to be fine. Just, if you haven't done it, keep working with your bank, get your things submitted. The queue will sort itself out. The log jams are going to sort themselves out. And I think everyone's going to be okay. I think they're going to continue to fund that program because it is successful and because it's meeting the demand that's out there and is helping keep people employed, which is the intent. I think that just keep plugging away. Also, a couple other notes on the PPP program. So it is available to pay employees who are on your payroll. It is not available, as I said earlier, to pay employees who may be independent contractors who file a 1099 and who are not your actual employees. However, anyone who is an independent contractor can turn around and themselves apply for a PPP loan to replace their lost wages. So I have advised a few nonprofits who have um, independent contractors who work for them, that their guidance should be to point those independent contractors to the PPP program to apply themselves as an independent contractor to replace their own lost wages over the next 8-week period. Those organizations had said, well, would it be better if we as an organization went out and got an EIDL loan to pay our independent contractors to keep them under contract for the next 8 weeks? The only problem with that is that you're going to have to pay all that money back at the end of that period. That is a loan. That's not a grant. That's not forgivable in any way. So you're going to have to pay whatever wages you paid to that contractor. You're going to have to turn around and pay back at 2.7% interest over whatever the loan period is. So that's a more expensive route than that person just themselves doing the legwork and applying for their own PPP loan for themselves as an independent contractor.
I was going to mention that. So thanks for bringing that up, Adam. Yeah, your contractors are eligible to apply for a PPP. And so if you're not their only client, even if you're their primary, they can do that work as long as they're a qualifying proprietor or LLC, and most folks in Montana are. So something to encourage them to look into.
Correct. I'm going to switch back and we'll walk through a little bit about the loan terms for the Paycheck Protection Program, for the loan forgiveness. So first of all, if you've gone through the application at all, you're probably familiar with this. When you're calculating your maximum loan amount, it's based off of your payroll costs and basically getting to what your monthly payroll costs would be and multiplying that by 2.5. The thinking is that the reason that they multiply that by 2.5 is that covers 2 months, which is the multiplied by 2. And then the 0.5 is just the additional extra amount that you can use for non-payroll expenses like mortgage interest, utilities, and rent. Not like those 3 things: mortgage interest, utilities, and rent. That's what this loan is available to use for. So you figure out your total payroll costs, and I put payroll in quotes here because they define payroll as not just salary, but it's salary and benefits, salary and all benefits, and all state and local taxes, but not federal taxes. So they have some guidance if you follow the links to apply, and if you read any fact sheets that we have, and we can point you to our FAQ, which we'll do after this. You can see what they actually mean by payroll costs. Once you get the total payroll cost for the year, you subtract the amount of cash compensation that you paid to each employee that was in excess of $100,000 per year. So if you have an employee who makes whose cash compensation is $120,000, you subtract the $20,000 from your total payroll cost, not the full $120,000, but just the $20,000, so that you're only covered for the compensation that you've given them from $0 to $100,000 per year. You get that total payroll cost, you divide it by 12 to get to an average monthly payroll costs, and you multiply that by 2.5 to get that maximum amount. If you happen to take out an EIDL loan between January 31st and April 3rd of 2020, you can add the outstanding amount of that loan to the maximum PPP loan minus any amount that you received in that cash advance. The thinking on this, so if you took out an EIDL loan for, let's say it was for an extra $100,000, and that EIDL loan is going to have to be paid back at 2.7% interest spread out over 30 years, whatever it might be. If you took out an EIDL loan in this time period, which is from the January 31st until April 3rd, which is when the PPP program launched, you can basically refinance that EIDL loan into a PPP. It's not going to be forgivable, but it does lower the interest rate from 2.7% down to 1%. So there's a special circumstance there. If you took out an idle loan in this time period to refinance it to a lower interest rate and call it a non-forgivable PPP loan. So to maximize your loan forgiveness, no less than 75% of the loan proceeds must be used for payroll costs, as the feds define payroll. And the remaining percentage, which could be no more than 25%, must be used for one of three things: paying interest on your mortgage, paying your rent, and covering utilities. The loan amount forgiven will be reduced proportionally by any reduction in the number of employees retained during the 8-week period after receiving the loan, and reduced by the reduction in pay of any employee beyond 25% of their prior year compensation. So it's based off of two things: FTE headcount and salaries and compensation. So I'm going to walk you through this. The first thing, when you're trying to figure out how much of my loan is forgivable, they're going to ask you for some headcount numbers based off of what they call full-time equivalents, which is any employee who works 30 hours a week or more is considered full-time. So if you have two employees that work 15 hours a week, those are considered one full-time equivalent employee. So they're going to ask you for your average number of full-time equivalents employed from February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, basically the same time period that we're talking about now for last year. We're trying to get a baseline of how many people did you employ last year at this exact same point in time. They will also allow you to calculate the number of full-time equivalents that you employed from January 1st of this year to February 29th of this year. And that's for some businesses that may be more seasonal or who have sort of seen a bump either up or down in their business and their headcount, not due to COVID concerns at all. So you have the option of you calculate both of those numbers. Whichever of those two numbers is lower becomes your bar, becomes your standard. That's the headcount number that you need to hit for in this next period of time, so that you don't have to pay back any of that loan. You get to choose which of the two numbers you use. Obviously, you're going to use the lower of the two. So they're going to ask you for one of these two calculations. They're going to ask you to calculate both of these, and then you get to choose. Basically, you choose the lower one, and then that becomes the headcount number that you need to maintain your current workforce at over the next 8-week period. If you happen to lay people off in February or March or even in April because you didn't have funding to pay their positions, and then you get a PPP loan, as long as you are back to that headcount number by June 30th, by the end of the loan period, if you're back to that headcount number by June 30th of 2020, you're okay. You don't have to pay back any of this based off of headcount, I should say. After you've done that, let's see, I lost a slide here that I was working at. So basically, let's say that you do this calculation and the lower of the two numbers is 20 employees. So the lower of these two numbers is 20 full-time equivalents. Whatever your number is as of June 30th, if it's lower than that 20, so lower than the number that you employed for your target, that your maximum forgiveness amount is going to be reduced by that same proportion. So we'll use that example of 20 employees. If I had 20 employees in from January to February 29th, and I'm only able to get to 18 employees by June 30th, that's what I have funding for, or that's the work that I have, or whatever the circumstance, we'll only able to get to 18, which is 95% of 20. My maximum loan forgiveness is only 95% of what the total loan was. So I'm going to have to pay back 5% of what the loan amount was, regardless of what I used the rest of that funding for, or even what I used it for. If I used it all for payroll, that's fine. But if I'm not at the same number of employees, I'm going to have to pay back that proportion. So whatever the difference between my head count from one of these two periods and my headcount for the 8-week period of the loan, that difference will be the proportional reduction in the amount that I am able to have forgiven. That's the first calculation. The second part of that calculation is related to compensation. You do have some ability to reduce compensation levels without being dinged from the feds, I guess. After you do the FTE calculation, any compensation reductions in excess of 25% of compensation of an employee's compensation will be subtracted from the loan forgiveness amount. So you do have that latitude from, basically you can reduce an employee's compensation up to 25% before it triggers any kind of a reduction in your forgiveness. But after 25%, if let's say I paid an employee $50,000, I'm not going to do that math. Let's say I paid an employee $100,000, and then I reduced their compensation to $75,000. That's okay. I'm not going to have any kind of a reduction in my forgiveness. If I then bumped their salary down to $60,000, that difference between 75 and 60 is going to get taken off of my forgivable amount, and I'm going to have to repay that amount back. So my total calculation, I take my total loan amount based off of my total payroll, my monthly payroll multiplied by 2.5. I subtract whatever reduction I had on the FTE based off of the proportions of FTEs. I subtract whatever reduction I have on my compensation levels. That then becomes how much I'm able to forgive. So in short, if you're able to bring back all of your employees, or the same number of employees as you had before COVID hit, and if you're able to pay them 75% or more of what they made before, you're probably going to be okay. But if not, this math does get a little complicated in trying to figure out, okay, how much of this am I going to have to pay back? As far as figuring out what the SBA is going to ask for as far as documentation to prove that you have met the requirements for forgiveness, the guidance we received from lenders even last week said that the SBA has said, we'll release that guidance later. So it's going to be some sort of payroll reports and some sort of documentation that you have to submit, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. But this is the formula. And again, same thing with the FTE number. If you're able to bring compensation levels back to par, back to where they were before the crisis by June 30th, you're still okay. So that's the time period where people are going to be looking and saying, okay, they're going to be comparing pre-COVID to June 30th, and is when they try to calculate how much of your loan should be forgiven. Questions on that? That's a piece that I think we've just learned about in the past few days of how this math is actually going to play out. Does anyone have any questions? We're also going to try to develop we have one, and we're going to probably look at it and see if we can develop a quick calculator that you can use to do this math for you. But this is what we know as of today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Thanks for that, Adam. I think that's super helpful in kind of walking through the risks of the PPP program specifically. There is the risk you're going to have to pay some of it back, and this helps quantify that dollar amount of a risk, which is really helpful.
Okay.
I have a question, Adam.
Yes.
So if we have employees whose kids were out of school, so they're on the Family Medical Leave Act, does that count as reducing our FTE? I mean,
No.
we'll still be payroll, but then we'll get that credit through.
Yep. Any FTE reduction due to required leave, emergency leave from the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or anything else that has come down statutorily, does not ding you as far as this forgivable amount.
Thank you.
Yep. We have a question. Is there a concern if employees are paid more than the 2019 baseline, i.e. some got raises this year? Absolutely not. No, that's not a concern at all. That's why there's this sort of two-pronged part to this calculation. Otherwise, you could say, well, we're going to reduce our headcount in half, and we're just going to pay everyone twice as much. But so as long as you are keeping the same number of people on the payroll, and if you're paying them more, that's fine. The maximum amount that you're able to get as far as a PPP loan, though, is going to be tied to what those 2019 numbers were. So as long as you're okay making payroll, basically, knowing that the maximum loan amount there may not be a full 8 weeks worth of payroll, if that makes sense.
And just a clarification, Adam, and you may have already said this, I might have just missed it. With the PPP, if you are looking to combine that with any of the unemployment insurance programs, you could not cut the PPP can't cover what was already what's being covered by any of the unemployment or pandemic unemployment compensation stuff, but you can use it to cover the hours that they will continue or have been working if it's intermittent leave.
Yes, that's my understanding. Although, if you have cut their hours because you don't have enough work, and they're receiving unemployment from another source, and then you're using the PPP to pay their part-time work now that you have them on. If they were full-time in 2019, with the look back, the standard, the bar that you need to hit, you're going to have a hard time getting that same number of full-time equivalents in the current period, meaning you're probably going to have a payback amount, right? Because you're going to get a loan for 2.5 times your monthly payroll in 2019. And now your payroll is cut in half because those people, just as an example, are only working half time. That means you're going to probably have to pay roughly half of that loan back at the end of the period. So again, the intent of this program is to keep people on payroll and to keep people out of the unemployment system. So if you can keep them on full time or keep them on the same level that they were at prior to COVID-19, that's the intent of the program, and that's what's going to allow you to have 100% of it forgiven, or most all of it forgiven. But yes, you're right. Sorry.
And then, so let's pretend I have my own nonprofit, and I'm looking at the risk of this. The ultimate risk, if they're reducing the loan forgiveness amount, is going to be whatever I didn't spend on those payroll costs plus is it 2% interest?
The interest rate is 1%. 1% interest over 24 months. And
so worst case scenario, if I get a PPP, I end up having to make cuts or my situation changes. If that were to happen to me, would I be able to put that money in a kind of like treat it like restricted funds, don't touch it, and just save it in order to pay that loan back with the funds given?
That's correct. That's exactly correct. If you're not able to pay all of this out. So basically the recommendation that most lenders have given is that you should take the maximum loan amount, which is 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And then whatever you're not able to put towards those required purposes, either towards payroll or to the other three, mortgage, interest, rent, and utilities, that to Shelby's point, you treat that like restricted funds. It's parked not in a separate account, but it's restricted, so you're not touching it. And then at the end of the loan period, you can pay that portion back. Again, the loan terms, basically at the end as of June 30th, whatever is not forgiven gets turned into a loan that's at 1% annual interest spread out over 24 months. So you don't even have to pay it all back immediately or pay back the non-forgivable portion immediately. You can stretch it out over 24 months. And at 1% interest, it's pretty cheap in that regard. But yeah, I think that's a good strategy, Shelby. Your risk is only that you have to give it back with a little bit of extra interest.
So I have something to say then. Our bank today gave us worksheets about how we can get, they're not going to give the loan in a lump, even though we were approved for the lump, because their
Yep.
mindset is that we signed off that would be spent for those purposes within that 8-week period. So we can only draw that much down, and the other isn't kept on account here or anything to use in the future. They don't want anybody getting in trouble breaching that agreement we signed.
Yep. So
or anything else like beyond 8 weeks.
yeah, this is meant for that 8-week period. And after that 8-week period, then it just turns into that payback. Your bank has the prerogative to talk with you around what the disbursement schedule will be. Once you are approved for that loan by the SBA, your bank is required to start the disbursement process within 10 days. They have 10 calendar days to start the disbursement process. But they have up to, I think, 2 weeks, or I'll get the exact figure. They have a longer time frame in which they have to have all of the money dispersed. So Krista, to your point, they can put you on a disbursement schedule based on what your needs are. So if they know your payroll is every 2 weeks, they can give you that same amount every 2 weeks until the money's expended. They have to start the process within 10 days, but they can put you on a schedule based off of whatever they deem appropriate or whatever you deem to be appropriate with them. But also know that their intent here is to try to get that money out the door. Most lenders I've heard of at least have said, like, we just want to get it out. We need to get it out and get it into people's hands. So we're not going to really parse too many details on disbursements. We may put on just a basic schedule, but for the most part, it's going to be you received your loan and here's your money. So it sounds like you got one that wants to do a more detailed disbursement schedule, and that is their prerogative. But at the end of the 8 weeks, they have to have all of that money dispersed to you. And then at that point, whatever you have not used for the expressly written purposes set out by the SBA, you'll have to pay some of that back. Although if you're just using it for payroll, you're probably fine. Any other questions around this piece right here? I do want to hop back to some of our other resources, just so you're aware of them. Also have on our website, if you go to the COVID page, there's also then an FAQ page, which looks like this. And this is as we've received questions and answer the same questions again and again, we've tried to capture those and put those just into a laundry list of question and answer. And it's based off of, or it's broken into different loan programs and paid leave options, unemployment insurance, and then there's some other links down here for further resources. But if you are wondering about where to find more resources or have questions about the PPP or the EIDL program or unemployment, there's a good chance that your question is asked and answered on the FAQ. And we're updating this FAQ probably weekly, if not more, to make sure that as we get more questions in these webinars and these town halls, that we're adding those answers to this section so that you can get those answers and have them readily accessible. So this is another piece that will be updated, just like Navigator that you saw previously. We're going to try to keep both of these updated with current information as best as we're able, given the circumstances as we see them. And I think, really that's a lot of the information that we wanted to cover today and make sure that you had available to you. We'd be happy to take any other questions. Shelby, is there anything that you'd like to add in regards to the FAQ or the information we've covered?
No, not at all. This is a great overview. Thanks so much, Adam, for doing the work to understand it and put it together. And, I think from you guys that are on the call today, or if you're watching a recording, to let us know where you're hitting that wall of decision making and whether it's information that you need at this point or clarification. or seeking partnerships with people in your community or lenders, or if it's just, I have the information, I have the partnerships, I'm at a stalemate, I don't know what to do. And of course, we can't provide all of that strategic guidance, but it's helpful for us to know what roadblocks you're running into, because the odds are other nonprofits are hitting the same ones. So we can be a little stronger together, and we appreciate the feedback that you guys are able to share with us.
Yep, for sure. I think we mentioned it earlier, but if you're trying to apply for a PPP loan and your bank says either we're not doing those or we're not doing those for nonprofit organizations or whatever it might be, individual banks have the prerogative to make those decisions for themselves. They can choose to, they can choose to be a part of the program or not, or be a part in a certain way or not. If your bank is not playing well and is not helping you, find another bank, reach out to another community bank. I do find that most local Montana banks, Glacier Banks, First Interstate, just your local community lenders have been really responsive and really helpful and pick up the phone when you call and are doing their best to help you. And I will say the big banks have as well. Really, people have just been trying to do what they can. But if you're not having success with one bank, pick up the phone and call someone else and say, I'm interested in the PPP program. You should, and if you're having problems finding anyone to work with you, reach out to us and we can see what we can do to get you connected somewhere.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Adam. Thanks for providing that information. Thank you guys for attending. And tomorrow we have some folks on the line that are going to help us walk through, what local area organizations, including food banks and shelters and childcare programs, are doing to adapt and keep their staff, employees, and volunteers and the people they serve safe. So hopefully it'll be a good conversation. And then Thursday we'll be talking through the census and changes, updates, and what we can do to keep engaged, given that regardless of what happens in the next 6 months, the next 10 years are going to be really impacted by the turnout for census. And so something important for us to be keeping in mind. We hope to see you then. And in the meantime, thanks for being here and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.